All right, thanks for joining us. I think we're going to jump straight in and get started here. My name's Shaun Norris. I'm a field CIO with Pivotal covering Asia Pacific Japan. I'm based in Singapore, and I'm really happy to introduce my co-speaker today, Dapeng Liu from DBS. Dapeng, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Hi, thank you, Morris. Hi, my name is Dapeng. I'm from DBS Singapore. I lead the credit risk development team. So today I came all the way here to share some interesting stories that happens to our development team.
So one of the interesting things about Pivotal is if you've worked with Pivotal or heard about Pivotal at all, you'll know that we are real proponents of pair programming. So we're trying something a bit different today, which is pair presentation. So we've kind of had to figure out who's going to click the clicker, and I'm going to try and do that. But think of me as your host to kind of take us through a DevOps experience report of what's going on at DBS and their experience over the past couple of years. We're going to look at some of the key outcomes that they've gone through and experienced. We're going to look at the focus of DevOps, or kind of these new ways of working. And while we're going to talk about both Dev and Ops, we're going to maybe slightly favor the Ops side. And we're going to talk about some of the culture changes that have emerged in the team at DBS as well as they've gone through this journey. So we're speaking in America here. DBS might not be a household name, but if we jump straight to the kind of business side, Dapeng, tell us a little bit about this award that DBS won.
Yeah, so this year we have achieved the global recognition of best bank in the world by Euromoney. So since this is a tech conference, so I would kind of like elaborate more onto the banking part of it. So rather we would jump right into the technical part of it, right? So since I lead the credit risk development team, why not I just talk about the credit risk myself? We have this legacy credit risk approval application, which used to be a gigantic monolith, consists of 8 million lines of code. Okay, don't be intimidated, but yeah, 8 million lines of code. And it was so heavy that we couldn't ever to afford rolling into production more than once a month. Right, so the preparation itself took about a whole week of time. So we had this interesting tradition that every time we roll out the release into production, we'll go to celebrate. We went to a party to celebrate because it's just way too much work. So, so nowadays we have moved from a monolith architecture towards a microservices architecture, and on average, our team are rolling about 100 releases into production every month. So since we don't do, by the way, the legacy application, when it needs to happen in production, it happens on Saturday night, 11 p.m. sharp. So these days, since we are moving to the microservices, then we stop actually doing Saturday night, and we only do during office hours. And then therefore comes to the title, right? 10 times a year into 4 times a day.
And I think it's even more than 4 times a day, but being conservative. My interest in this, when Dapeng and I got to know each other earlier in the year, was really this Accelerate research, which hopefully everybody has read. If you've not, really recommend you go look at this excellent research science from Dr. Nicole Forsgren and some collaborators. But the high-level message out of this book is that if you want to measure your ability to deliver software, or your software delivery and operational performance, then you really need to think about 4 metrics in the throughput and stability category. And they break this down by how often do you deploy, what's the frequency, what's your lead time from getting to idea to production, and then how often when you make changes to production does it fail, and how often, like how long does it take you to recover, what's your time to repair. And so, quick show of hands, who's heard of Knight Capital? Yeah, so Knight Capital, as you know, they went for throughput, but maybe without the stability they needed, because on the 1st of August 2012, they pushed a production change, which had some unanticipated consequences, which resulted in them losing about $400 million in 30 minutes and going out of business permanently. So particularly when we're talking about financial services, it's really important that you want both of these. You can't have throughput without stability. And so the summary, and we're going through this really quickly because you can go read this. You've seen this slide already at this conference. Elite performers in delivering software, their deploying hundreds of times more often. They do it hundreds of times faster, and they really have 7 times lower failure rate than the low performers in this science, in this survey. And this is like more than 30,000 respondents. It's covering every industry around the world. And the Accelerate book goes into a really deep level of explanation around the science behind this. But the more I talk to Dapeng, the more it seems to me like DBS is one of these examples of high performers who are going fast with both stability and throughput. And so we thought, like, how can we share some of the experience stories around this? The punchline of the Accelerate book is really that if you adopt these new principles and practices around these new ways of working, then you will achieve better software delivery performance, but not only that, you will experience better business outcomes, to the point that the highest performers in this research were twice as likely to meet or exceed their organizational or business goals. And so, as a proxy for that, this being awarded the best bank in the world, we think that should speak fairly loudly of DBS achieving business outcomes, but we really want to focus on the technical ones. So tell us, Dapeng, a little bit about the DBS context around this.
Yeah, so let's put the stories back into our bank's context. So as you can see on the left-hand side, we are not that unique in terms of the adopting microservices, adopting platform as a service. Well, it is an on-prem path, but since we are don't judge, right? So we are after all, still a bank. So we couldn't really, we can't just put the data onto the public cloud, as of now, at least. So, so we also kind of like embrace a automation, total embracing of the automation. The outcome, technical outcome, we have a much faster cadence to release into production. We have much shorter release time, the preparation of the release. We have all sorts of good things, right? So then, therefore, as the technology department, we are very proud to have done our share into the global recognition of best bank in the world. Yeah, by the way, yeah, even the team engagement will be actually significantly improved. We will elaborate that later on.
So if we go back to this Accelerate research for a moment or two, when you dive into the detail, there are really 7 key areas that they come out with that they say they think these are causally related to improving your software delivery performance. Now, we don't have time in 30 minutes to go through all 7, and we thought that we would take 2 of them and really look at some specific experience examples of DBS, and that's really around using a platform as a service and using infrastructure as code. Let's start out with infrastructure as code. If you're a team that has moved to manipulating your servers or your containers with code rather than manual ticket-driven infrastructure management, well, the research says you're almost twice as likely to be in that elite performance group. And so using declarative version-controlled environments is something that's really emerging as a trend. DBS has been doing this as well. And so let's hear a bit more about how you use infrastructure as code at DBS.
Yeah, so in terms of the provisioning of your CPUs, RAMs, network, hard disk, all of this stuff right now, by using paths, right, they are nothing but a single line of configuration talking about how much that is needed to run your microservices. This has been a significant improvement towards the release cadence. However, we think in terms of the infrastructure, right, the word of infrastructure, from a software end-to-end perspective, it is actually can be much larger than just the hardware alone, right? So we are looking at not only about the hardware, but also talking about how about your source control system, how about your build pipeline, how about your run pipeline, deploy pipeline, how about your environment provisioning. It actually should be a holistically covered by the automation. So these days, our pipeline is more like a pipeline of pipelines. So actually, it is there to generate the pipelines to run different microservices. As of now, we have, on my team, we have about 260 microservices, or in this case, only 140 made into production. Some of them are there to only support the testing. All of them are being managed by the same set of pipelines. So as a development manager, I believe my role is there to make sure that all of the developers are there focusing on getting the feature out of the door. So don't battle with the platform, don't battle with the tools. So as far as possible, we have achieved a quite satisfactory result. As you can see from here, last month alone, we made 2,000 pushes into the testing environment. So which is, or even look at a single push, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes. Yeah. And also, right, so let me elaborate a bit more on the so-called automation part of it. It wasn't so beautiful at the beginning of the time, right? So as all story happens. So then we started writing microservices back then, 2017. And I generally find a trend where people tend to piling up more and more code onto the existing code bases. That's why we were seeing that yes, we have microservices. There's only like 13 of them. And the bigger ones actually can go up to thousands of lines, hundreds of controllers. So despite the very fact that we are trying to emphasize on microservice architecture, we are trying to split out the repo a little bit smaller, and the right behavior is not happening. So I was like confused for a while. Then I sit down with the team and then we had a discussion. What's going on there? So the feedback was actually everybody recognized this is the right thing to do, make it smaller. However, every time they want to do anything, it's only about 100 lines of code change to finishing their job. Therefore, to manually set up a pipeline, to manually set up the repository, to manually link about everything, it took them roughly about 2 to 3 days. So therefore, the right thing didn't happen. So this is actually resonant very well, very kind of like strongly to me, saying that the right behavior, just because we know this is the right behavior, people may not choose to do so, just because it is actually not easy to do, right? So then that's almost the beginning of where the time we start to spend a lot more effort to automating everything that we can possibly automate. So even setting out the pipeline itself, generating the pipeline instead of asking the developers to come up with their own pipeline, maintain themselves. So the other interesting story, this thing happens not like a overnight story, stuff like that. It happens over the course of 1.5 years. We continuously kind of like finding more opportunities where are the places where we could put in some automation to reduce the overhead, and what kind of possibilities the tools can provide, because the tools are also evolving.
This is really cool. If we go in and look, at platform as a service, this was one of the other of those 7 areas that the Accelerate research suggests is, helpful in moving your organization to that elite technology performance group. And in the 2018 State of DevOps report, you were 1.5 times more likely to be an elite performer if you were using a PaaS, or a platform as a service. And we've been chatting about this, and we think this is probably because developers are spending more time above what, like James Waters calls the value line, working on things that your customers actually see and that matter to them, and less time, spinning plates and doing important but invisible work to customers. So what's your take on this? What's been your experience with platform as a service at DBS?
So yeah, as I said, right, so the platform as a service basically extract away the environment from the team, where in this case, we can really kind of like focusing on getting the software out. Developers will be there to kind of like driving the more features out of the door, and operators don't really have to kind of like look at the how do I synthesize your application, how do I operate your application. Everything just comes with the standard procedure, right? So another interesting aspect I find we generally agree is the platform as service, or in this case Cloud Foundry itself, doesn't really give us the persistent storage option. So we were left with no hope of putting stuff persistent, right? So then there's only one way out. It's basically writing a whole bunch of stateless applications, which drives the right architecture changes. And also the interesting about the routing capabilities that provided by the platform really enable us to do the so-called office hour deployment. So these days, for all of the 100 releases every month that we push into production, right, it only happens in office hour. We do not do like after office green zone. And in fact, the green zone, the definition of green zone has been evolved into such a way that now it's more like 24/7, right? So there are also other interesting things. I won't go through all of them, but I really want to shout out for the concept of build pack, which pretty much abstract away how should we build up the container. Again, I'm not a anti-Docker or what, but the point is, from my point of view, anytime we spend that is not directly related to the functionality that is going to help our business counterpart, it's not going to be that much value over that. So writing a Docker file, deciding which will be the port number to expose, deciding which user to user to run the process, and then deciding which kind of like JDK to use, the user-based image, stuff like that. Well, there's value, obviously, but I don't think that's directly related to our so-called business value. Therefore, the build packs are all here to kind of abstract away this kind of concerns from the team, where now they can really kind of focus in getting the business logic out. So as of now, we have 140 microservices rolling into production. Given the fact that we have only started this journey about 2 years, almost 3 years, so it is actually, if you look at it, you do the math reverse, right? It looks like on average, every week there's a new microservice deployed into production. Every week there is a new microservice deployed to production. Yeah, overall we have lumping through different environments. We have more than 600 GVMs running across the testing environment versus the production environment. So again, PaaS give us such a good abstraction level that we do not have to rely on the whole fleet of operators to make sure that all of the GVMs are running. So yeah.
That's fantastic. Even as a customer of DBS back in Singapore, I've noticed that I'm used to mobile banking apps getting updated maybe every 6 months or every year. But with DBS, it seems they're coming out with new apps and new functionalities in the mobile banking app really almost on a weekly basis. And as a customer, I go into the app and it's new and there's new things I can do in there I couldn't do before. So definitely it's visible even from a single customer point of view that you're spending a lot of time above that line and writing customer features.
Thank you for the compliment.
So I want to talk a little bit about operations. You know, my background is really in operations, and
yep.
You're from the development side. So, you know, between the two of us, we're kind of dev plus ops. I'm interested to hear things like how has, you know, the traditional practice of like incident management changed? You know, how do you cope with some legacy things, and maybe talk a little bit about these?
Yeah, so in the legacy world, incident management, as far as I can tell, personally speaking, is more like a passive mode where people are sitting there waiting for bad things to happen and react to it. So let me just share a very interesting story that actually happens really in our production, where we have this reporting module, and unfortunately there was a query, not so optimized query, went into production under certain very awkward situations where the query will try to pull way too much data from our database, therefore resulting into a out-of-memory error. So in the so-called legacy world, this will be triggering a major availability issue, bring down the whole system. Thanks to the platform, since we are running multiple instances of the same module, and we don't really have the incident report coming from business counterpart. Instead, it's all of operation team which start to monitor start to see some anomalies running into production, and then start feeding back to us. And then, therefore, indeed, these personally speaking, I would say that the way that we are dealing with incident management are starting to shift from the passive mode into a more proactive mode, where we will actually go in there and see stuff, and before even the business people are kind of like making noise, we are there to help them. Right, so there is another interesting kind of like a change after we have on board of all these tools, all this architecture, is about the general idea of dealing with issues. Okay, so in the legacy world, most of the time when you see an issue, the first reaction is let's roll back. But right now, the mindset is more like let's roll forward, right? Instead of roll back, why do we want to go backward if we can't move forward? Just because we have this application split out into multiple modules, and therefore we cannot have a total system breakdown. More likely than not, there's only a smaller module here and there having issues. If the platform is not able to help us, or actually most of the time the platform is able to help us to restart the application, then buy us time to kind of move forward, fix the bug, and then rolling a new release. Yeah, so after all, we still a bank. There are all the regulation, there are all the rules that we need to follow. We really want to move fast, but we don't really want to break all the glasses. So incident management as one actually coping with all the so-called legacy processes, right? So we have this so-called change management process where whenever we want to go in production, we need to file a ticket. However, the ticket itself consists of very lengthy form, and then a lot of, unfortunately, accumulated a lot of, over many years, there's a lot of fields that we need to fill up. And for most of the time, we actually observe is basically people actually fill up the right value at the wrong field. So it's not that intentionally their intention was bad. It's just because the form was not that obvious which value is supposed to be put where. So after a while, we think about, hey, why can't we automate this? So therefore, right now we are setting up. We already set up automations to automatically generate the ticket, to automatically fill out the form, pull the information from our application, the application that we want to deploy in production, pull the information, fill out the form, and then submit to the change management. And by doing this, I think everybody happy, right? Change management, they will say that they don't have to break the whole bank process just for us. I know we got what we want. Also, we move into the production at a much faster pace. Yeah.
So this is a really interesting pattern where you don't necessarily have to completely throw out the old in order to start going faster and experience some of these, better outcomes. I thought this was a really interesting pattern when we discussed it earlier. One of the other things I'm really interested in is and I suspect the kind of audience and wider community is how has the working culture in your team changed? Let's talk about a few of these topics. How maybe have you restructured your team?
Yeah.
What's the sustainable pace of work look like? And you've talked on some of these. And then how have your employees? What have they said about living through this change? So maybe let's start and talk a little bit about the team structure, the team topology.
Yeah, sure. The team used to work like a monolith, layers upon layers, right? We have a front-end developer, we have back-end developer, and somehow we also have this middle layer we call the cross-cut team developer. And therefore, we also have the people are dedicated for testing, dedicated for operation. So if you look at that, it's actually nothing different than a monolith application. For all of the problem for monolith application, we know it manifests itself in the team structure also. So we spent quite some time to say that there is really no need to give exclusive access to certain activities just because you are wearing certain hat, you are playing certain role, right? So we are even start thinking about instead of we call people developers a QA operator, we should just merge the title to be one. We should call that it's called software maker, right? In the process of making software, there are activities of analyzing the problem, therefore BA. There are activities of implementing the solution, therefore the developer. There are activities of testing the implementation, whether that works according towards the specification or not, therefore QA. And then therefore also the activities of running the application in production. All of this, they are not necessarily need to be sort of like siloed, right? And now we are actually trying very hard to give people the opportunity to say that if you can do more, please do more, right? Don't stay there. So another interesting kind of like I would say changes that happened is there used to be this kind of finger pointing between the devs and the ops. Yeah, my job is done now. It's your problem. But he may not necessarily happen to know all of the internals of how the application work. The operation is not so kind of like smooth. So right now, what we have done is we set up the pipeline. We set up the log aggregation, set up the early warning alerts. Every time there's a 500 error happen in production, within minutes the development team will be notified. So therefore, the operations are right now much more orthogonal towards the application running. They are more like taking care of the environment rather than taking care of the business logic that is running inside the application. So the feedback loop has been significantly sped up. Yeah.
So, I think also just almost off script here a bit, but related to your teams, you've been doing a lot of interesting work on how to add people to your team. Almost everyone is struggling with how do you find good developers. So talk to us for a minute or so about like the hack to hire efforts you've been doing and how you're actually going out and attracting new developers into the team.
Well, actually, this is a very interesting story, right? Everybody says that, we don't have enough talent. Nobody has enough talent. That's a given. That's almost a given. Nobody has enough talent. So for one, we rely on the events like external event to getting people in. We run hackathons. Every year we run actually twice. Then we attract external talents. But also we also have the so-called internal programs to upskill the people that we have, right? Cross-training, and give them the opportunity to say, move from the front end to back end. So if you do have the expertise in front end, why don't you do 80-20? For spending 80% of your effort on writing the front end technology, and then spending another 20% of time pairing with another guy who actually works on the back end. Therefore, we have a better way to kind of cross-pollinate the expertise among the teams.
And you've mentioned now you don't have to deploy Saturday night at 11 p.m. anymore. The team must enjoy that they can do deploys during the day?
Yep, absolutely, right? So talking about another one, the sustainable pacing, right? When I first joined the bank in 2017, I sort of like see that it was an accepted norm. It was an accepted norm to work overtime, to sort of like come back during the weekend. I'm not saying that it's a mandate, right? It's an accepted norm. So these days we pretty much say that by throwing more hours to your project, you can only bring the project that far, right? There's a very, very low ceiling that is there that you cannot break. So we changed the team building philosophy to say that why don't you look after your people? Right? Why don't you look after people, and then transitively your people will look after the applications. So for one, how we look after our people is basically every now and then, right? So most of the companies are very concerned about the starting hour. We are very concerned about the ending hour, right? 6:30 is the time we'll go there and then kick everybody out of office, right? You are not allowed to stay in office after 6:30. So there has to be something wrong. There has to be something wrong if, let's say, there's a whole lot of people staying after 6:30. It's because like there's some sort of like impediments is not removed. Is it because some other project management that projection that we have done wrongly, the estimate that we have done wrongly? So we kind of like go back to do retrospect if there are situations happen like that. Because we believe software development is more like a marathon than a 100-meter sprint, right? So it won't happen in a day or two, or maybe it won't happen in a year or two, right? So it actually is a very, very long sustained pace of continuous improvement to the software we work on. So we do need to have that marathon style of giving up the energy to the application itself, right? Talking about teaming, yeah.
I think it's really exciting too how that you've actually been able to measure it to some extent, how people are happier working in your team.
Yeah. So in our bank we do have this employee engagement survey, right? So my very first year, shamelessly speaking, was very, very bad. So it was 66%, way below our department norm. So we didn't give up, or I didn't give up, sorry. So our second year, actually at the second year you can see, this is actually a test case for the stuff that what we have to, and then is that effective or not? Basically how can we tell? This is the test case are there. So the second year our engagement score went from 66 to 89, and I hope this year I can even get a better one, but yeah. So Another interesting kind of like a cultural change I observed during the team is we run this lunch and learn session. Basically, we buy lunch and gather everybody together every Thursday. So to share something. Our first several series, our first several episodes was really hard. The harder part is not about the lunch, but the harder part is about the presenter, right? So it was very hard for us to get the people to speak, to kind of like share some idea. Like this month, we have no choice, or I have no choice to start some moderation, right? We need to kind of like, there are just way too many people over there saying that I want to share. Can I have my slot? Can I have my slot? Yes, you can, please, but there are people in front of you already registered. Then we have to shift you to the next week. So that kind of learning culture, suddenly I feel that the learning culture has clicked into the team. So. Again, lots of organizations talk about learning, and let's say continuous improvement. What's the test of that? I personally believe this is the test when the people are there to volunteer, to fight for the slot of like I want to share, and then will be the test case for saying that we are there being a learning organization.
That's awesome. As we kind of wrap this up, any advice for other teams out there starting out on this journey?
Okay, so 2 advices from me. The very first one is for the people who are in the room who can have influences towards your corporate policy or enterprise policy. The right processes will drive the right behavior, right? Just think about the story I shared before. Just because there's the right thing to do does not mean people will do so if it's not easy to do. Make it easy to do. Make it easy to do. The second one I want to give is about the 1% theory, right? So since we are a bank, let's talk about the banking, right? So assume you deposit $1 at the beginning of the bank, and that the bank will give you 1% interest rate every day. By the way, we will not give you that much. And by the end of the year, you will reach about $40, okay? So if you are looking at that 1% alone, that doesn't do much. Yeah, but however, if you kind of like accumulate the compound interest across a long period of time, the true transformation can happen within your day-to-day life.
So that's awesome. I would just kind of wrap this up as well by saying, go check out Accelerate, go check out the 4 metrics. If you're interested in this and you want to share it and you liked the Phoenix project, you should go read Gene Kim's new book, The Unicorn Project, which is coming out in November 28th. And I want to wrap up and close by thanking Dapeng and DBS very much for coming and sharing this experience report. I think it's been really helpful.
Thank you.